importance of intact forest ecosystems, why it's important for safeguarding planetary process. Professor Hobson is chair of biodiversity and biodiversity conservation and sustainability in Ritual University College. And Dr. Shears is executive director of Williamstown Rural Lands, and she is also associate scientist of C4 ICRAF. Both are very well-known scientists. They will bring us to enlighten us in these important topics today. So I will pass this to Robin Shears now. Over to you, Robin.
Okay, thank you, Himlal, and welcome participants. I just would like to start to say Peter Hobson is really the driver of this work. I'm so pleased to have to join his intellectual bubble and presentation bubble. So, but together we hope to inspire thought and action on everybody's part in the conservation of intact forest landscapes. I'm trying to advance. Okay, so just briefly, what we'll cover today or what we'll discuss today is first characterize what are intact forest landscapes. Second, Peter will present this new ecology lens through which we can examine the issues related to intact forests and in fact the forests themselves. Third, he'll discuss the vulnerability and protection of intact forests. And finally, together we'll talk about how to future-proof these forests for the rest of time as a way forward. So just digging in, what are intact forest landscapes? Well, they are contiguous landscapes which comprise multiple features, not just forests, but also the non-forest elements such as streams, and according to the soils, maybe no trees grow there, but they're natural spaces. They have had minimal human disturbance in some certain period of time, 50 years, 70 years. And they're basically wilderness, what a lot of us know as wilderness. And they are large areas. They are landscapes that are large enough to maintain the native biodiversity in that place. Intact forest landscapes contain much of the remaining old growth forests in the world, though those are not synonymous terms. Again, we refer to these as wilderness, which may have newer forests in them. Where are they and how big are they? Intact forest landscapes comprise only 9% of the ice-free land in the world. You can see where they are. They're up in the mostly in the northern hemisphere, and in the boreal and temperate zones. But they comprise 9%, but they only comprise 20% of global tree cover. So of course we have plantations and regrowing forests and all sorts of other kinds of forests that are disturbed that comprise the global forest cover. 36% of intact forests are within indigenous people land, and they play a tremendous role in conserving and stewarding those forests. 50% is in the northern hemisphere, therefore 50% is in the southern, concentrated of course in the Amazon and the Congo. But 65% is in Canada, Russia, and Brazil, as you can see on the map. Dramatically, since year 2000, 12% of the intact forests were lost. And that trend continues. So why focus on intact forests? Well, they are vast in size, and their size allows them to support the highest levels of biodiversity, which includes, importantly, top predators. They're large enough for the top predators. They're large enough to host a rare species and other key ecological engineers. As such, they sustain the complete and complex systems of biological diversity, including sustaining evolutionary processes. So for species evolution, intact forest landscapes are essential. Secondly, they provide a very important ecosystem values and services, a myriad of them, including and importantly hosting a disproportionate share of global forest carbon, storage, and they sequester quite a large number of carbon molecules per year. They also have naturally high structure and functional diversity, given the composition of these landscapes. And then finally, really, because of their size, because of their intactness, they do express these self-ordering dynamics and feedback processes, which are so critical today in given particularly, of course, the climate change impacts on natural ecosystems. So as such, they really are at the very, very center of safeguarding nature. Now, with that, I'm going to turn it to Peter, who will take us on a great ride with incredible evidence compelling evidence for the conservation of these places. Peter.
Thank you, Robin, and welcome all to this webinar. I'm going to try and summarize here the results of what is probably about 12-15 years worth of research looking at forest ecosystems and their functionality. So we have been specifically focusing on, for instance, plant trait, functional traits, and how these then relate to some of the master factors, including moisture and temperature. But the focus today will be on that functionality and temperature. So we often hear this term complex systems. What does it actually describe in say context of forests, but also other semi-natural systems? It describes self-referential systems, systems that are able to self-order and build complex energy dissipative structures. So this is this is almost as, if you like, the law of order of nature, building that complexity and try and sort of delay. It won't stop, but it can delay the process of entropy across scales. Over time, and this is the fundamental bit, is that natural systems require time. They need the space, but they also the time. They will build biomass, they will build networks, and the intention, if you like, the functional intention of this complex building is to optimize energy utilization, try and minimize the amount of escape to heat, and turn that into utilizable energy that we sometimes refer to as exergy. Sorry, next one, Robin. Thank you. So in 2019, we published a paper on capturing what we saw as the key ecological attributes essential to ecosystem function, but I want to focus on 3 of those. These are 3 what we see as fundamental to ecosystem growth: the biomass, the networks, the information. The information is the collective investment in genetic material and diversity, and the networks, of course, is the links, whether it's through the trophic cascade and the webs that that a system will build over time. And in an earlier paper to that 2019 one, we took some what we saw as proxy measures of biomass, networks, and information in order to generate a global map of functional, these are optimally functional terrestrial ecosystems at this time and space. Where are they distributed across the planet? Now, if you cast your mind back to the previous slide on where intact forests see, you'll notice that they actually superimpose very neatly onto this optimum functional map. And so we'll see that across, as you would expect, the Congo Basin, the Amazon, and then the North Boreal or Taiga regions that cut across Canada and northern Eurasia, then of course sweep down into Southeast Asia. So we were looking at those proxy indicators: carbon storage, plant functional richness, and then the structural heterogeneity that one would expect in systems that are building that self-order and building the complexity over time. Next one, please, Robin. So periscoping down, of course, this is the big, if you like, a challenge, is that can we actually see evidence in field and then scale up to a global picture. And of course, if you working with complex systems theory, then you would expect certain changes through emergent properties as you scale up. So there is always a certain element of caution one applies when you're looking at evidence in the field. But let's just roll for the moment with what we picked up over the last 12, 15 years in the field. So this is one case study in the UK. This is a comparison on the same site in the same area between remnant. So this is not truly intact, but remnant semi-natural woodland that, as far as we know, has not been disturbed for the last 47, 50 years or more in actual fact. And then plantations that have been established, native species plantations 37 years ago. And if we just take that biomass measure, then both in terms of green standing biomass and then the amount of dead wood lying around, there is a sharp difference between the two, as one would expect. The question then, of course, is that, but how does that relate to, let's say, one of the big proxy indicators we use for assessing forest ecosystem function, temperature, surface temperature. And there is a marked difference in terms of the difference in the mean average daily temperatures, but also in terms of the attenuation, that's the oscillations of those temperatures between the two. Next one, please. Thanks. Thank you. So in this field analysis, we have taken case studies across Europe. We've not yet had the chance to drift into tropical zones and would like to sort of extend that research into those areas. But at the moment, we're in the Carpathian area. We're in a biosphere reserve here, where we have a good opportunity to look at, as best as we know, non-intervention, a primary old growth forest of beech, and then in the buffer zone of that biosphere reserve, areas of beech that are being managed for sustainable timber extraction. This is selective forestry. Using exactly the same metrics, the same method and techniques, we see again that temperatures are elevated in areas where there has been forest management, in contrast to those that remain intact and, as best as we know, undisturbed. And we published this back in Applied Ecology back in 2011, 2012. Next one, please, Robin. Yes, and even if we just take one element of that biomass, the amount of dead wood, and you would appreciate in old growth intact forests, the volume of dead wood, both in terms of single structures as well as the collective amount of dead wood, is considerably greater. But we have enough sample sites to show some indication that as the amount of dead wood, the volume of dead wood accrues in a forest system, then the temperatures are increasingly attenuated. They don't only just go down in terms of average temperatures, but the level of extremes and oscillations are also markedly changed and moderated by the quantity of dead wood. Interestingly, I haven't got the data here to show today, but what we are now working on is that there are differences in the state of decay of dead wood and the attenuation of temperatures. And what we are seeing, and we'll be publishing later, is that those logs that are showing most advanced levels of decay show greater attenuation than younger, fresher portions of dead wood. Next one, please, Robin. We're scaling up again in this particular case study to Madeira. We're using spatial analysis data to compare three main types of ecosystems, if you like. If you want to put them onto a spectrum of intervention or disturbance, then we start with a native intact forest of Portuguese laurel that is still found on Madeira. And then, of course, there are eucalyptus and pine plantations. And then at the very extreme end of that, we move into cropping lands with banana plantations. And we again carried out the same process, the same metrics of analyzing surface temperature, moistures, and we see clear distinctions, as one would expect, that as you move out of a forest zone into crop zones, then the temperatures become more extreme. They're also less attenuated. And then in contrast, where we have a native old growth intact forests, we see a much lower level of temperature, but also lower attenuations. The right-hand graph there is an interesting addition to this, because we were looking, in this context, we were looking at natural heterogeneity and how does this affect temperature moderation or temperature patterns within forest systems. And there is a sharp distinction between what we now refer to as intervention structures or edge effects and patterns, geometrical patterns that we see in plantations, i.e. their trees are planted in lines or in blocks, and that this contrasts markedly in terms of the impacts on temperature with native forests, intact forests that are under natural regenerative patterns and gap dynamics. So in the native forests, we see a continuation of decline in temperatures with spatial heterogeneity, natural spatial heterogeneity, and that contrasts very markedly with the geometrical patterns of shape and structures that we impose, if you like, into a forest system when we think about planting it out and spatially managing it in an optimum, commercially optimum way. So we felt that this gave an added element of, well, what should we be thinking about when we are contrasting natural dynamics with those from planted? Next one, please, Robin. Thank you. So that really is just a whistle-stop tour of the, if you like, the ecosystem evidence there. In a paper we published in Science in 2016, we were looking more about, well, what are the global pressures that generate vulnerability in all natural ecosystems globally, but specifically to intact forests. And we used OpenStreetMap. It was a 2-3 year project in the making, where we amassed an awful lot of data. In summary, very quickly here, you can see from the map that at the moment the level of protection at IUCN categories 1 to 4 are 1 to 2, sorry, are deeply fragmented. So that sort of sense of, well, what do we mean by intactness, both in terms of landscape, landscapes at the spatial level, but also in it will impact, of course, in the functional intactness that we have just described. We see there from the maps that clearly there is high levels of fragmentation. Next map, please. And we can see this in a if you like, in a summary global context within the paper that that we a group of us co-authored here, that the areas in red across the globe indicate where there are virtually pretty much no roadless areas remaining, and then the sort of the lightening up of the colors through the orange yellow spectrums into the pale blues are where we see increasing fragmentation. And the immediate picture is that, yes, there are still blocks within the Amazon basin where there is true intactness, and then of course across parts of the taiga zones in the northern hemisphere. The Congo is looking deeply fragmented. The evidence that we came up with was that whilst there's 80% of the Earth's remaining roadless areas, this is already fragmented into many patches and 50% of those, more than 50% of those, are less than 1 square kilometer. So that's a buffer around a road, which you would not expect to see any other road. So the challenge is very much there. And the graph next to it sort of indicates that when we look at temperate zones, we have already lost a considerable amount of that intactness. And what really remains at the top end is primarily in the tropical equatorial forests and, of course, the boreal ones. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what do we do about this? This is something that is the group are now getting their teeth into. It's a challenging point that we're all coming together. Then we're trying to sort of map out, if you like, a roadmap of where we should be going. Where should our focus be, specifically in the context of intact forests? We come up with sort of 3 possible areas of investigation that we need to focus our attentions on. One, of course, is that we should really be protecting all of the remaining intact forests. I think the level of urgency, as we have seen with climate change, and the talks within IPCC of tipping points either having already been breached or imminent, then it requires dramatic action. And I don't think it's a long shot to say whatever remains of our intact forests needs strict protection. That we can then also springboard off these sites in terms of understanding far better how ecosystems, forest ecosystems function, how we can work much more closely in our managed forests within the grain of nature and synchronize with the patterns that we see in intact forests, use these as learning landscapes for developing a global sustainable forest. And then finally, we cannot do this without a partnership with the people and the communities that have evolved and lived and adopted these landscapes. We must work with indigenous forest communities, and I think this just echoes a global call that we are hearing increasingly more and more through the UN. Next one, please, Robin. So I'm going to try and I'm just going to skip through this one. It's condensed, but I understand there will be slide sharing later on. But we have, in terms of, well, what do we do with our managed forests? So we're now sort of thinking, how do we lift this knowledge and understanding of intact forests into applied forest practice? We've come up with 6 principles that we see listed in bold here. And as in summary, it picks up on what we say: the strict protection that we need, the mimicking of natural processes and dynamics to create an ecosystem based approach to our in our principles and our practice, and to engage in a fully participatory planning process. Thank you. Next one, Robin. And this is where I hand back to Robin. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, a lot of buttons having here. So thank you, Peter. We have discussed with the CEM Forest Ecosystems Group earlier in the year what is our scope of interest and what are the activities we can do to promote forests of all kinds and protect forests of all kinds around the world. And in this particular case, we're looking at the intact forests. The goal, of course, of all of our work should be, as Peter indicated, really to protect the remaining intact forests. So strictly, but in an inclusive manner. So the objectives for achieving that goal include to really contribute to the conceptual framework of what are intact forests, where are they, or just what are they, what is their role, where are they, sort of the theoretical work that underpins, that can underpin practical work. But in this case, the global framework, and I should say other people are working on this have been working on this for quite some time, of course, we would strongly promote the incorporation of the shared ethical and cultural values of all peoples who are related to these landscapes, coupled with scientific evidence from research. The second objective, of course, is to develop concepts and models to actually to apply theory to practice that are founded in the ecosystem theory and system science that Peter was just talking about, and the functionality of these landscapes. Not just develop concepts, but then to promote the understanding of those concepts through knowledge sharing and transfer between research partners and public-private partnerships and research and public partnerships. Finally, really raising the awareness globally and broadly through all people everywhere about the non-tangible values of these forest ecosystems. Timber, bananas, game meat are really easy to comprehend, but we're pushing, we need to continue to push people to really understand these values and the services such as functionality, evolution, key species, this kind of thing, ecosystem services. So finally, this is just a sort of a conceptual model of what we're proposing that our group does and that some of us are working on. The goal, of course, is to secure the adaptive forest ecosystems for people, for nature, for everyone. And again, in order to do that, we work on the policy level, the guidelines level, and theory and research. But the real work on the ground comes with promoting and informing programs, providing demonstrations, as Peter said, this learning, use these forests as learning landscapes, and then publication and outreach and that kind of thing. Peter, do you have anything else to say about this operational framework before we open it up for questions and discussion?
Yeah, I think that's right, Robin. I think we can sort of bounce some ideas and share a discussion I'll be taking notes anyway, because I think there's an awful lot we need to, as we say in this knowledge exchange, start to build some good solid foundations as to how we move forward.
Okay, then Rajiv, I'll hand it over to you to open the floor to discussion, questions.
Thank you, Professor Peter and Robin, for very, very interesting discussion around the concept of intact forests, and we intend to take forward this discussion. And I think it is important that we receive feedback and questions and comments, even critical comments from the audience, and I think this will help us a lot. Like it will help Professor Peter and Robin to improve upon the framework that they have so intently created after their years of hard work. So I open the floor for any question answer and any observations or any suggestions from the participants. You can type in your questions in the chat box, or alternatively, you can also raise your hand if you want to speak. Yeah, so I think we are opening the floor for discussion and question answer around the theme that Professor Peter and Robin have just spoken. So the floor is open now. Since I don't see any questions at this moment, let me ask. I have like a lot of questions. Actually, I have been following very intently. And so my first question is, Professor Peter, I have looked at the spread of the intact forests, and you spoke about. So I can see that the intact forest is all over Europe to tropical Asia and Africa and Brazil. Is there everywhere. So how do you factor into account the biodiversity element into this discussion? Because if you look at the intact forest, right? Thank you, Peter, very much. You have, of course, a very large chunk of intact forest that is there over Europe and Eurasia. But in terms of biodiversity, that may be, it may not have a very high biodiversity compared to what we have in the tropics. So how do you navigate through that aspect? I have a series of questions. If you allow me, I can ask all the questions, or you may want to answer this one and then maybe allow me to put other questions. Yeah.
I can quickly just interject on that one, Rajiv. It's species biodiversity. Let's start there. Biodiversity is relative, as we know, relative to the evolution of the ecosystem that we're talking about, and of course to its geographical positioning across the planet. So the focus tends to be more on what is the functional diversity inherent in the system. In other words, what is there in numbers, but more importantly, in terms of their role that they play within the system, and how much of that, how many of those have specific functional obligations, if you like, to the building and the sustaining of the whole system. So of course we understand in boreal forest systems these are early evolutionary landscapes, in contrast to, as you quite rightly said, the tropical zones, and so we don't expect to see those numbers, and equally we don't expect to see the advancement in terms of the actual ecosystem function. But if we take it in this regional context, then we would say if a system up in the boreal zone has its full complement of what of that ecosystem that has evolved since its early origins, then we would expect that the networks and the information invested in that system is going to give it high functionality. Did that work, Rajiv, or not?
That's very helpful. No, that's very helpful. I have one more pressing concern that nowadays we see a lot of forest fires are happening all across the place, and it is going to be a very big challenge for all the forest managers, as well as the places where we have a lot of forest. So how does intact forest, the very concept of intact forest, do you think interacts with this emerging concern of forest fire, especially in the context that under the climate change scenarios and in the warming world, we are going to witness, the world has already witnessed very severe wildfires, and in going forward, we are going to witness. So a lot of people may be arguing that maybe if we have a little bit of fragmentation, that may be helpful. So how does this concept of intact forest interact with the forest fires? And that's what something I was looking forward to in this talk. And yeah, could you please?
Yeah. It's for about 8 years, I did quite a bit of my research on forest fire ecology in the northern part of Finland, where we were looking at old growth forest in Uulanka National Park, and contrasting that with the surrounding areas of forests that have the same origins, if you like, in terms of timelines, but have been managed. And there are stark differences both in terms of their structure and their shape. Now, what's interesting is that where we have seen in the old growth stands within the biosphere reserve that are strictly protected, the forest patches, fire disturbance patches, the wildfire disturbance patches, are by and large on a smaller scale, a much more patchy, heterogeneous, much more diverse scale of a disturbance than you expect to find, or that we did find, in a more homogeneous landscape. Now, homogeneous meaning that where they have actually managed the forest, they're of course managing in a selective way. So, and as a consequence of that, you find that the structure and the size of the trees that are retained become more uniform, and there is less heterogeneity, and this allows for a greater sort of canopy fire acceleration across forests. Now, I understand that there are spits and spats of similar research and data coming out for instance, there was those old forests in Tasmania where they have been looking at forest fire ecology in the areas where the forest fire disturbance is at its most minimum is in the oldest areas. So that inbuilt heterogeneity, that investment in biomass, and you may say, but that conflicts with biofuels. I have to say, in the old growth forests we've seen in Finland, the biomass investment that goes into the dead wood is also heavily waterlogged. So this is where carbon acts as an attraction, if you like, to water and accumulates large tanks of water on the ground, and this minimizes the impacts of forests. So it's getting our heads round in terms of, well, how do we distinguish between that biomass water buildup in old growth forests and still hold an argument in the face of what we see as biofuel buildup, that is the current understanding of some of the problems. So yes, old growth forests, intact forests, forest fires are more patchy, smaller scale than we're witnessing in increasingly more disturbed sites that have been impacted.
Right. So thank you, Peter. I think we should open the questions. We should take questions from the audience as well. So please type in your questions, and we have a question coming from Martin Holland, and I will just read my question. Or Martin, do you want to ask your question yourself? Or do you want me to read your question? Okay, so I will read, since Martin has not raised hand, so I will read the question for him. Will providing the information of these policymakers be enough, or do we need better ways to directly monetize some of the conceptual but non-monetized values so that people can afford to make the right decisions?
Robin, do you want to hit that one?
Well, broadly, it's clear that we need to change our thinking so that it's not about monetizing. Of course, people are living hand to mouth in many parts of the world, and they make decisions every single day that affect forests. But governments don't need to necessarily live hand to mouth, and they can create structures and opportunities, I do believe, that that are supported by funds that come from places other than selling timber or growing bananas. But Peter, this is just broad thinking. Maybe you've thought about this deeply, as you have.
Yeah, well, not necessarily. I just wanted to add to one of your point there, Robin, is I think we shoehorn ourselves. We're in danger of shoehorning ourselves if all the while we are going to work purely on monetary measures of the value of ecosystems. I mean, we have already identified that ecosystems are so complex, we haven't even got to the bottom of just exactly how they contribute to the survival of planet Earth. So we need to be looking at other measures. I think we need to be far more accepting in policy that there are whole societies that are not able to provide a tangible worth to ones. I mean, you're not going to go into the Amazon and talk to the Amazonian Indians and say, give me a monetary value for this forest. They will just give you simply the value of that forest to their survivorship. Now, we need to scale that up to humanity. It's quite clear we are facing a global crisis on a scale that is unprecedented in human evolution. And yet all the while, we link and attach ourselves up to this idea that until we can actually demonstrate that it has monetary value, we carry on business as usual. That will not work. The systems are collapsing. We see this with climate change. We see the impact it is having on food security. We need to link those intact ecosystems, primarily the forest ones, to that very livelihood, that we're able to produce food because the climate is being regulated and if you like, ameliorated by forests. If we don't get to that point of policy change or understanding, then I think we are on a continued course downwards, I have to say.
Thank you, Peter. We have one more interesting question coming from Dr. Shalini Dhani. She is the South Asia Chair of CEM, and I request Shalini to put the question in her own words. Are you able to speak, Shalini?
She might not have.
Okay. So, so sorry for that. I think then in that case, can we provide her access to speak, or Miss Mariana, can she speak? Or then otherwise I can, okay, Shalini, fine, I got your point. So I will ask the question on her behalf. So she's first of all congratulating us for a very informative presentation. And yes, so I think Shalini is on board, so maybe she can ask herself. Dr. Shalini, you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question yourself. I think then that will be more, you can express better. Okay, I think if it's taking time, then maybe I will. So I would like to ask, how do you see increasing invasion of species and replacing native forest species in the current scenario, and how this is largely affected and is going to impact our national forests? And we, especially in India, are observing this slowly affecting our natural water springs and resources. And how do you think this can be addressed? Shall we agree and accept the invasion, or otherwise, what kind of interventions can help to reverse and reduce this very pressing problem of invasion?
Yeah. Wow. Shalini, this is an extremely challenging question. I mean, challenging question to the world's scientists. I mean, Edward Wilson, before he sadly passed away, said that one of the dark horses that are challenging us is alien invasive species, in terms of both the speed of which they're taking over native ecosystems and the disruption, the dismantling of that whole thing we've just been talking about, the ecosystem function at the larger scale, because they are disruptors. They haven't evolved with the system. They're opportunists, and they'll come in and they'll create what we sometimes call ecological holes, of which then expand out. And what does this do to the whole ecosystem? I can only tell you, because I have not studied it in detail, that one can surmise that as that unraveling, if you like, of those networks and invested information occurs because of the disruptive species, we can only expect the system to become a little more dysfunctional progressively with time. What do we do about it? Well, if I had the hand of God, I would say we would get rid of them as quickly as possible, in order to try and sort of minimize the amount of damage. And we see elements of this happening in different countries where we look at invasive species, whether it is Himalayan balsam and Japanese knotweed in the UK. The Environment Agency is on a campaign to eradicate, but we've reached a point where it's costing so much and it's so pervasive, it's almost impossible. Do we let nature ride this out and then just sort of put our fingers in our ears and hope that the system will survive it and somehow will reorder? Or do we practice some minimum intervention? When I say minimum, I mean calculated intervention to try and minimize the impact and help the ecosystem, if you like, facilitate the ecosystem to recover itself. I'm in favor of the latter. I think what we can't do is we cannot underestimate the impact this is going to have on both intact forests and any other ecosystem that is under invasion from non-native plants or animals.
If I may add to that, Peter and Rajiv, excuse me, this work is really focused on conserving intact forests and protecting intact forests. Now, there are a lot of us out there who work in human-dominated systems or modified systems. I know Himlal, Rajiv, a lot of the members of our group really work in systems where people are producing resources, fuel wood or fuel, food. Somebody else just asked, what about the food? I think that's where a lot of this management around the edges of intact forests and comes into play. And Peter, you have good ideas about the management strategies and functional management that can be applied in these other landscapes. So we will task this other set of people to do what needs to be done to try to manage invasives. But I agree, invasives were pointed out in the long time ago as a critical threat to all of our ecosystems, intact and otherwise.
Yes, so thank you, Peter and Robin. I think we have a volley of questions coming, but we have very short time. Dr. Shalini, would you like to speak very briefly on about this, or if not, we can take another question that has been asked by Dr. Shalini.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rajiv, Dr. Peter, and Robin. I think that's a very interesting and at the same time very relevant this webinar that you have organized, and we really gain a lot from this presentations that were made. And I think my questions mostly come with the perspective of how we are facing these challenges in South Asia. And there are different opinions and perspectives about invasive species. And at the same time, I have many interlinked questions, but I think that we already are short of time. So I'll leave that for another face-to-face discussion or another opportunity to discuss all these things. But I think this is a very important time when we talk about intact forest, their conservation, and we talk about human modified forest areas and the impact of invasive species on them, because intentionally or non-intentionally, we have already modified our forest ecosystems and moving from climatic climates to more cyril and pioneer stage forest areas. So I think the planning has to be more climate sensitive and more people-centric approaches that you already talked about, nature-based forestry systems and all. So I think I really appreciated what your suggestions are, and especially Peter, how he mentioned that we quickly need to address this challenge and make our proactive approaches to reduce this kind of threat to our forest ecosystem. So without adding much more, I thank you all, and I look forward to other questions that are asked by other members of this talk, those who are participating. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini. We are nearing the end of this webinar, but I have one more question. At least we will read the question by Mr. Duguma. So I'm sorry if I misspelled. So he says, thank you, Professor Peter, for a very nice presentation on the work done so far. I have one question and another worry. So let me read it on behalf of Duguma. How can we compensate the agricultural demand increased with high population increment in the globe and highly causing forest land degradation to save our forests? My another worry is, how will we highly influence governmental bodies to really conserve our forest resources than using the issue for political consumption only? Yeah.
I've got some thoughts about this. One of them is that in latter years, the increase in food production has not been as a result primarily of land expansion. It has been as a result of intensification on the existing lands, agricultural lands that we have. Now, whether that's been a good or bad thing, we now know with the IPCC 2019 report that in actual fact that intensification has contributed to climate change. So I think it's a false premise, and I bow to Rajiv on this one because he has higher expertise in agroforestry, but I think it's a false premise to assume that there is a trade-off between forests and agricultural production. I think there are plenty of evidence, and we see some very small models, and I think I say shamefully small models in the UK of agroforestry, where we see high yielding production going on in an organic landscape where trees are an integral part of that production. And that we need to start to be thinking in a much more bold way of, well, agroforestry is not a new paradigm. It's something that many cultures have been practicing for centuries, but we haven't been sharing that out across the world. And that, if you like, industrialization of agriculture was primarily a European based practice that is sort of scaled up with that rather, may I say, brutal approach to clearing land and covering it in one crop. I think we need to start to be looking much more carefully at other cultures and how they maintain high production in a much more heterogeneous landscape where trees are fundamental components of that. So I see agroforestry landscapes as part of the global tree landscapes that we need to be incorporating into this wider story of environmental recovery and climate change mitigation.
Thank you, Professor Peter. I think your talk has generated an enormous amount of interest among the limited number of listeners that we have here, and we will be putting this on YouTube as well. And I think we are getting a volley of questions. We still have a lot of unanswered questions left. I will be sharing all the questions with you, and we will be replying to all of them. But I think this is time that we have to close this webinar. All the good things has to come to a close. And I personally benefited a lot from this webinar, and I hope that we are from this forest ecosystem group, we are able to take this work, the hard work that you have done to the logical end, we're able to publish a policy brief or some sort of policy document that we can bring out and share with the larger public as well as the policy makers. But I think this has been a very useful and informative talk. And I would like to thank all of us who have made this possible. Especially, I would like to thank Mariana from Commission for Ecosystem Management. She has been the driving force, and completely she has provided us all the support in organizing this meeting. Like sitting in different geographical zones, it is very difficult to manage such live meetings where question and answers are happening. I'm really thankful to Mariana. I'm thankful to our speakers, Professor Peter and Robin, for sharing with us their years of hard work. Dr. Himlal has been also very helpful in this, in conducting. I also thank Dr. Shalini, Dr. Madhav Karki, and our CEM. So we also thank Angelina Andrade. She has been really very helpful and very supportive of all our endeavors. Maybe Himalalji also would like to thank. Himalalji, over to you, and then we can conclude.
Thank you all. Thank you for the great presentation, Peter and Robin, and thank you for all participating. Some of you are so early and some of you are so late here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, hey, thank you, Professor Peter and Dr. Rajiv. It's very nice to, well, thanks, Peter. That was nice. It's just sexism, you know. I think, but whatever. Hey, that was really nice, Peter. I love your work. What's
Yeah.
next?
Well,
Are you
exactly.
working
What do we do now, Robin?
Yeah, now that the cat's out of the bag.
Well, I think because you and I are driving intact forests, I mean, if I may, I think I'll try and pull the assemblages of this paper together and get it over to you, and see what you make of it.
Let's make a nice section on people.
Yeah.
On the management. Well, you've got the whole management stuff, so I really look for it. I think I can contribute there.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've heard so much, probably been following more than I should be on Twitter, the strong drive of the of local indigenous communities who are standing up. I mean, standing up against some really, let's be honest, some pretty nasty technocrats who are just basically dominating the planet. And these, you sort of go out to these people thinking, good God, do you know what? They're really up against it.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about Bolsonaro and then the indigenous Indians, and you think, what? They really do need a helping hand. I mean, they really do need some back support there. And I think you're right. I think they are let's be honest, they are the guardians of these systems. They're going to make, if we can't invest in them, then I've absolutely no hope for humanity. I really don't.
The science is clear. It's nice to put that out there. The evidence is clear. We have the management strategies and practices to do this. It's the people, of course.
It's the people.
Yeah. Now, so we should probably decide, is this paper, you know, what is the paper really promoting? Is it the science and the evidence for the importance of intact forests? It's been said, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you have new stuff that you want to summarize.
Well,
a sort of review.
I mean, the bit I haven't touched on, Robin, and I think probably more than the science, it's going to get more traction. And that is sort of moving more closer to your domain, which is, for instance, I've just finished running a whole series of participatory planning workshops for Essex Climate Commission. And it's quite clear to me that if you get a full participatory planning process in play, it really does turn on society. I mean, these people, it empowers them. It gives them a sense that they're now in the decision-making role, which they've been abandoned up until that moment. They just get finger wagged at and told, this is how it's going to happen. We're going to go ahead with it. Their idea of participation is just to tell them, instead of say, why don't you become part of that decision-making process? So why don't we bring in a paper that really unites participatory planning of local indigenous peoples and intact forest conservation?
Well, I have just the person and paper. We were, before I got this job, which has really ruined my life as a scientist. Sorry. A lot of budgets and management. I was working on a project with the three women who ran what they call the prior consultation process in Peru with indigenous people all over the country to inform and shape the national forest policy. That happened in 2013, 14, 15.
That's so powerful.
It was an incredible process. It was an incredible process. And it actually did influence the policy. Now the policy's gone, it's gone haywire since then. But we have a paper one of us has a paper that's sort of on the edge of being published or going for publication. So I could work with her, Christina, on that. That would be a separate paper, but we can draw on, you know, we could use the Peru Consultoria Previa as a case and center the paper on that maybe.
Okay, because we've got a participatory planning process called Morisco, which we published in 2014,
Oh,
and we've got case studies, one of which is in Peru,
oh,
and this was published in 2016,
oh,
and I think we could use this Morisco process as the new template for safeguarding intact forests
oh,
through that
interesting.
whole participatory planning structure of Morisco as a as a template. So if you go on to morisco.training,
Yeah.
it's as simple as that. So it's
Okay.
www.morisco.training. It's got all of the free online access. And I would say, right, with your time constraints, Robin, there are 2 videos on there, which are only 12 minutes each.
Okay.
And I think the one that would excite you most is the second one, where we did a study in dry forests in Namibia.
Okay.
And it is really about how do we use Morisco to harness and empower local communities. And I think if we weave that into intact forest conservations and take hold of that last recommendation we put in there, which is this will not work unless we get full participation from the local communities, we could use that recommendation as the strapline of why this paper is essential to moving the whole process of intact forest conservation forward.
Okay. Okay. You really animate. This is exciting. Okay. Okay. I will watch the videos.
Okay.
I will shape a few thoughts.
Okay.
Of sort of what I can contribute and areas of where I can contribute.
Ideally, Robin, for me, it would be a gold rush if we were able to get a little bit of money, go down, parachute down into one of those communities and literally run a workshop with them. Absolutely.
Yeah. You know,
and then document it, and then publish it. I mean, that would just be a winning card if we could even get that far.
Does Morisco, does that group have funding to?
No. I just wonder whether IUCN would have anything that would just fund just a workshop. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not an expensive process because you know we're not private consultants trying to make a killing. We're just simply trying to support local communities and empower them.
We'd have to work with the local group,
right?
They would invite, they would set it up, invite it, run it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly that.
You know, and they could run it, for God's sakes. We don't necessarily have to be there, but it is nice to be there.
Yeah.
You know, there's another group. Okay, so looking for money for that. I see commission is still on. Maybe Mariana, tu sabes si hay fondos de IUCN. Anyway, also, you know, the Yale guys at Yale University have a great series of forest dialogues, and they have a really nice, but they're more at regional levels and not community levels.
Not community. No, I'm much more about getting the voices of the people who walk and live that landscape. Because when you start to see them identify some of the issues and the problems that are emergent in their lives, they're a very different picture to what cascades down from centralized government or departments in forestry. Completely different story.
Yeah, and it's not all about money. It's not.
No, exactly.
Not waiting for monetizing. Well, listen, of course, a lot of this work has been done. There have been lots and lots of these dialogues. So we could also, you know, get together some money to do a review paper, get somebody to do a review paper on this. I don't know, maybe you have a graduate student who could do. And
I'm thinking, okay.
But I know
for the moment, let's as you say, have a look at those 2 videos.
I will
put down some thoughts, and I will equally put some thoughts down in terms of blending that whole idea of local social participation with intact forest conservation. I mean, at the end of the day, we may find that we get nowhere with trying to push for strict protection of all intact forests, but where we might get to is handing over the baton to the local communities to manage their own landscapes. A sort of, if you like, corporate, a cooperative sharing of that landscape of which they become the managers. And that sort of community-based approach might be one that I think it could be even more exciting, if not more impactful.
Yeah, it's great until the leaders get killed. You know, they're shot by Bolsonaro's henchmen. Because there are, of course, examples of this, and people are doing it around the world. But we could promote it very much.
Yeah.
Another thing, Peter, is of course a lot of the people in our group, the forest ecosystem group, are more human modified landscape.
They are
working in those places, and you know, we might challenge them to work on a concept and a paper or something that highlights the local people's role in alleviating pressure on. And of course, I mean, I just think there's so much literature on all of these things already. Where are the new ideas? I think the new thing that we could come as this group is, well, we've got these intact forest people pushing, you and me, other people. We've got somebody still on. Arlene, well, anyway, we'll bring your stuff in. Yeah, and challenge the other guys to think about what's their role in this. Do you see this comment from Arlene?
Yes.
People are still on. So
the people are still on there.
Exactly.
That's great.
Residents, and how do you manage the resident interests with the landowner interests? If so, if often the landowner interests are extractive. True that. Yeah. Thanks, Arlene. It's great to have you here. Yeah, that's interesting. In this case, Arlene, are you thinking of like indigenous people living on so-called public lands, or tenant farmers, of course, struggle with this, where you have a resident and a landowner? Any of the above? Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Yes.
Good question. There's a lot of, go ahead. There's a lot of the opposite, of course, Arlene and Peter, where the public policy says on public lands, you are restricted to X, Y, and Z, you cannot do this. But the residents, I'm thinking of the Amazon and the smallholder farmers who are residing in those public lands extra legally, they're the ones who are making the decisions about what happens to the forest, because the policy is not enforced. So there's both ways, actually, Arlene. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I was Arlene. There's some work that's going on in the Ukraine around the biosphere reserve in the Carpathians, where they are looking at. I was just saying to Robin, and of course, in my complete IT naivety, I thought we were sort of having a jolly good ping pong bat between the two of us, without realizing, of course, that everybody is sort of still tip-tapping away here. So now you're in the fold. Yeah. So in the Ukraine, where they are looking at getting, as I was saying, these collectives, these cooperatives together of small landowners who have a shared common interest. And their shared common interest is not the wholesale deforestation and global selling of the timber in the Carpathian Mountains. It's much more about how do they secure the provisions that forest provides for the very local communities who need it most. Otherwise, we will see an exodus from that mountain, and we will lose those village communities that have been part of the inheritance, if you like, of the Carpathian biosphere, and make it what it is. Now, I'm not talking in a romantic way here, because if you talk to those local people, they can talk in terms of the forest can be a bit of a pig sometimes. In other words, it's sort of, it just frustrates them at times. But the main point is they recognize in a deep way and in a profound way that it is the only reason why they're there. In terms of its provision, in terms of the way it holds onto the soils on those deeply steep slopes. They would lose all of that. They have seen where they, outside the reserve, where they have built Europe's largest ski reserve, that the whole landscape is just slewing into the valleys and into the rivers. They're losing it. And they're deeply worried about this, but they're feeling completely disempowered. They can't do anything about it. So what they're doing is, and the Ukrainian government in a sort of way is allowing this, is for them to start to establish these cooperatives, these collectives, where they, if they come together in a big enough cluster, I use that word deliberately, then that cluster starts to demonstrate stronger power than individual owners. And we have something similar going on in the UK called farm clusters. And these are farmers who are fed up with commercial farming that is degrading the whole landscape. They see another way out, regenerative agriculture, but solitary voices, one farm does not work. So what they're doing is they're grouping together. I'm a director of one of those. They're coming together. There's 54 in just one region, and they're having a huge impact. And we're now, the bit I was saying to Robin, we're now running Morisco participatory workshop with these farmers, and the process is inviting in other farmers who are a little skeptical. You know, how are you going to do this? How are you going to manage this? How are you going to balance this against productivity? And these are solutions I will not give them because I don't have them. I'm not an agricultural ecologist. They will come up with these decisions themselves.
Yeah,
the solutions.
They know how to farm.
They know how to do
Well,
this.
here's a good question about that, Peter, going back to one of the questions somebody asked about monetizing. In those discussions, do you hear people say, well, you know, this is expensive to do regenerative agriculture. How do we pay for it? How do we market this and this? Like, is money part of that conversation? I should say income, revenue.
Yes, I mean, there is always that conversation, but the reason why they have that conversation, Robin, is because everybody knows that when you transition from one system to another, you need an upfront short capital investment to ride them over that short process. Now, those that have been in it for 5 years already can't understand why they didn't do this earlier, and that's usually the point at which they that's the point they get to, and they go, well, do you know what, we're now spending far less on herbicides, pesticides, on soil recovery or mitigation practices, compaction, all of those factors, because the regenerative agricultural process, that nature-based solution, takes care of all of those issues and problems. And their losses from not using pesticides are marginal compared to the input in terms of how much they have to pay for herbicides and pesticides now, given the fuel problems that we're having, and how much it's costing companies to produce fertilizer, and farmers can't pay for it anymore. So you have it forced on you by default because the systems are collapsing, or you're proactive and you say, let's manage this properly, and then move yourself towards becoming an environmental citizen in how we manage our resources. Whoops, I probably frightened Arlene away.
No, she's trying to get on her computer with a microphone. Thanks, Arlene, for trying. Yes, this regenerative agriculture, it just takes some years to really start making the business case for it, right? When I was in Denmark, I was working on this issue too. So, but I agree, the capital input, the capital is required to jumpstart that process. And I wonder if capital can be provided to forest-based communities, you know, also. So agricultural cooperatives, biomass, biofuel cooperative, that kind of thing. So what? Yay, Arlene, welcome.
Yeah, no, I completely go with that point, Robin, because I think if we want to talk about using, let's say, intact forests, and the point you were the valuable point you were making about, well, do we task our colleagues in our SEM group to be thinking much more integratively about how we manage those cultural landscapes to bring the baseline up much closer to intact forests? We're now talking about sort of almost regenerative forestry in the same way as we talk about regenerative agriculture.
Yep.
And we would probably need an upfront capital investment just to tide those foresters over who, like their agricultural counterparts, are just used to terms of harvesting and productivity. And where's the investment in the whole ecosystem service assessment that the Globe signed up to in 2012 anyway?
And payments for ecosystem services.
Yep, all that.
I mean, I'm just hearing him lull in my head. Well, and myself. Well, if people are going to invest in regenerative forestry, where does the money come from? Like, right? Why? Even there's a German fellow working in Panama, I think, who's doing really great investment in regenerative forestry. But I do think they have timber coming out of those systems. So one question to address, really, and you might address this in your forestry bit, is, is there any level of economic activity in intact forest ecosystems, forest landscapes, possible, allowed, feasible?
You're saying money?
Yeah, money. Yeah, any economic activity at all. Of course, passive recreation.
Yeah. Well, yes, but Robin, look what I think. It's an American economist who's just put a price. I forget. I've got to try and dig this out. Has put a price to what it's going to cost to mitigate a 1.5 breach of temperature breach of global climate. And we're into trillions and trillions, and that is just almost a guesstimation. So the money is going to have to be forthcoming anyway. The question then is, well, what solution do you tag it to? And at the moment, what we're proposing is that intact forests are at the front line. We have to actually take notice of those, and this is where money needs to be invested. Now, there are strands to that, as you were suggesting there, that one of them is transitioning process. So that part of that, a large sum of that money, is where we are going to be buying into this global program of planting however many trillion trees they've been talking about. How do we do this in cultural landscapes where we're also looking at food security, which is one of the other top 10 World Economic Forum issues? And so that whole integrative management process, which was recommendation 5 in our listing, is integrating forest management into a much bigger plan of what we do. And part of that plan is water and food security. So that transitioning effect will need initial pump priming with cash. And our point is, it's money worth spending, because in 5-10 years time, the dividends will come back to us.
I need to go soon. Maybe Sule, we can ask Sule asked a question. Where did you put urban forest, mostly the peri-urban landscape? We're not so much talking about urban forests here, but they do play a great role in all sorts of ways. They have so many services that they provide to urban residents and to urban ecosystems. So they are critical and important places. But we're not, it's a little bit outside the purview of our discussion. Arlene's having a hard time getting on.
I'm on. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay, here you are.
I was trying not to jump in and talk over you, but this is so fascinating, and I'm hoping that you'll have another one of these, and hopefully where folks can get on and have a conversation with you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And I heard that you have to go, Robin, so I don't want to keep you.
Yeah, Arlene,
I'm in the LA area.
Oh, you're in LA.
Yeah.
May we have your contact information?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Sure, sure, sure.
I'm about 7,000 emails behind, but I don't care.
That's exactly. I got a pointer.
Well, I've just handed out my email to those who want to talk to me. I'm really happy with that. As I think there was another request in terms of putting us in touch with certain individuals, and so I'm just putting out casting out the net there to say yes, please, really happy to talk further with those. I know webinars are not always easy to extend the conversation on, so maybe we just need to move it to email at some stage, but I'm really happy to do that. Very happy.
Yeah. Okay. Peter, this was really great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Super. And Dr. Musa, great. Okay, Dr. Musa, great. Well, we can talk if you want to talk intact forest landscapes and what is the urban contribution, urban resilience contribution to that. Let's talk.
Yes. I mean, and it will be. I mean, this much we know, but certainly I call it green veining. What happens in terms of urban forests forests in urban landscapes will be essential conduits to meshing and green veining the intact areas of forest that we see, because as we know, the world is moving to ever more urban landscapes, and so therefore we have got to integrate that as well as commercial forest landscapes into the bigger plan.
Peter, would you mind putting your email and contact in the chat again? For whatever reason, I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
Oh,
well,
it was you messaged only me, Peter. You have to put
I'm
it to
sorry.
everyone.
Sorry. Right.
That's an old trick.
No, forgive me. It's just me. I'm hopeless at this. Okay, here it comes. All right.
Yeah, we have to be careful, of course, of
There you go.
well, never mind.
Thank you.
Thanks
Okay,
so much. Really nice. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Yep. And everybody else. Bye-bye.